Well, for our next presentation, we're going to be having a short screening of Mama Has a Mustache. I'm going to introduce to you Sally Rubin. Sally is an Emmy-nominated gender nonconforming professor and documentary filmmaker based here in LA, and a proud parent of a fabulous 8-year-old. Her most recent film, Mama Has a Mustache, premiered last year at Outfest and has played all over the world, including screenings in Telluride and beyond, and is currently playing a key role in the national dialogue around gender identity in children. Everyone, please welcome Sally Rubin to the stage.
Thank you, Cameron. I got my trusty water bottle. Raise your hand if you're one of those people who never can be without your water bottle. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I really want to thank Cameron and the team here at Penny Lane Centers and EDGY. I'm so impressed with how well run this conference is, all of the prep, all of the tech. As a filmmaker and a social activist, I do a lot of these conferences, and I have to say this has been one of the very best ones so far. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I cannot wait to share the film with you all. I was thinking back, Cameron and I first met about over a year ago. Actually, I think it was the end of last summer. I had just finished the film, had just released it, had sent out a few sort of emails to organizations that we thought might be interested in screening the film, and Cameron watched it, and we kind of chatted about how it might fit into the conference. And I remember him saying, I think it would be nice to screen it maybe early in the day. Let's just let people smile and laugh a little bit and bring a tone of lightness and playfulness to this conversation around gender identity, which can be so heavy sometimes and doesn't have to be. And, this was pre-DeSantis, Don't Say Gay, all of this wave of anti-trans and anti-gender identity-based legislation in schools that we've seen over these past few months. I'm pleased to be able to show you guys the movie, let you smile and laugh a little bit, maybe even some tears. There's sometimes some tears. And then I'll talk a little bit after the screening about the making of the film, the impetus for the film, the type of outreach and impact work that we've been doing, and maybe you'll be able to kind of see for yourselves where your organization might find the film useful, how you might be able to use it, and I'll be around all day and very much looking forward to talking with all of you and learning more about your work. I think we'll go ahead and play the film. We are going to have a chance, after I say a few words after the film, to discuss. We'll have some mics going around the audience. So feel free to think of questions, comments, things that you're puzzled about, want to raise, and we can talk about those more after. And then I just wanted to kind of highlight for you all too, we put on your tables these flyers, which have in them glossary of terms that we find useful, especially in talking about gender identity with kids, and then also these best practices regarding pronouns. And these more have to do with at the workplace, and I find these just really useful. So just wanted to highlight that you have some take-home materials that you can use after watching the film. Okay, with that, I think we'll go ahead and play it, and I'll look forward to talking with you more in a few minutes.
First question.
Can you be a girl and have a boy body, or be a boy and have a girl body?
Yes, that's transgender.
Can this person be a parent?
Yes, my dad. I feel like I'm not really a boy or a girl. Because the God isn't. I love myself. Mama has a mustache.
Mommy has a mustache.
Okay. Thank you all so much. So fun. So fun to hear those little kids' voices here in the Skirball Center. just chiming out, and I was watching from the side, I could see the parents in the audience relating, laughing. We all know, even if we're not parents, the freshness and just sort of inherent wisdom of kids. So yeah, very, very fun. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the background of the film. I'll just frame it a little bit for you guys. We have so many gender identity experts here today. I definitely don't claim to be that. I mean, I think I've been gender nonconforming from the moment I came out of the womb. I was the birth parent to my daughter, so had the really interesting experience of being someone who's probably more butch identified, but carried a child. And my daughter now, I say daughter, I mean she's 8, she calls herself a boy, a girl. I asked her recently, what's her gender? She said, well, you're a girl, mama, you're a boyish girl, and I'm a boy, a girl. Like one long word. So, I speak from personal experience. I'm definitely not a gender identity expert. So I thought I would focus a little bit on just sort of the film itself, and then we can bat around questions and ideas. The next slide, please. Okay, this is Beatrice, my daughter was 6 when I made the film. I used mostly kids, friends and family, and then I also went on various social media groups, networking groups, to kind of connect with other kids from around the country. It was really important to me when I made the film that we have diverse representation, not just racially and ethnically, obviously, being of primary importance, but also that the kids come from different geographical regions of the country. There's 12 different kids featured in here, different ages. They're primarily 5 to 6. And then different familial makeups. So some of the kids in the movie are non-binary, some of them are cisgender, some of them, there's actually a transgender 6-year-old in there, the one who has the really quiet, almost whispery voice, the girl with the long hair. Her parents then, when I made the movie, didn't want her to be, sort of to appear as transgender in the film. Now they've moved out of the state where they're from, and they've actually been very, very active. Anyway, there's a, really diverse set of kids in the movie. This is one of them. So the impetus for making the film, definitely my own experience as a non-binary or gender non-conforming parent. I just became curious about looking at this new generation of kids, what they think about gender. And after my last film, which was called Hillbilly, it's a film that's all about politics and, very sort of heavy, a lot of adult talking heads, I thought, I really just want to try something that's playful and new and listen to kids for once. I'm so sick of listening to grown-ups, even myself, talking and opining all the time and just adding to this national dialogue that's just filled with vitriol around politics and so much else. Literally, that was the impetus to be like, let's just listen to kids for once and see what they have to say, specifically around gender. Really kind of seeing, including in my college students at Chapman where I teach, a real change over these past 3 or 4 years in the gender identities of my students. And I remember that turning point for me. One of the students in one of my film classes I was talking to, and I had totally thought that I had pegged her as a sorority girl and, wonderful student, but a very specific type. And I remember when she came up to me after class and said, Professor, I actually identify as they. And I was like, oh, wow, it is a whole new world. And I became curious in making the film about at what age does that start and what do really young kids, 5 and 6-year-olds, think about gender. I don't know what the answer is, but whatever it is, it's going to be interesting. So it started from a place of sort of posing that question. Timeline, a lot of filmmakers had a pandemic film. This was my pandemic film. I did the first interviews in February 2020. This interview was March 14th, 2020, the day of the lockdown. I remember her mom was like, there's this virus thing going around, but you can come over if you want. And I did it. This is the last one. This is before lockdown. All the other interviews were done through FaceTime. I would sanitize all the gear, leave it outside. The parents, I say parents, but it was actually the moms who helped facilitate all the interviews. They would bring it in, we'd do the interview on FaceTime, and then, I'd get the gear back. So yeah, basically it took me about a year, about 8 months of animation. And then I released the film last summer, and we've been doing impact and community engagement and outreach work ever since. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The process of making this film is something that I could talk about for hours. So I'll just say a few things because I know people are curious. It's rare to see an animated documentary. Those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand, especially one featuring kids. Part of the reason it's animated was that it was the pandemic, so we couldn't shoot anything. So, everyone was stuck at home. And I have the unique gift of being able to draw exactly like a 6-year-old. So I did a lot of the drawings in the film with my 6-year-old daughter and her 6-year-old friends. I basically started by, and I know a lot of you do various types of social issue and activist work. A lot of you work with young people. I really started by posing just a series of questions, not knowing what the answers would be, which I always think is like a key component of a successful film. Something that's less, I'm going to hit you over the head with an idea that I already have the answers to, I'm going to convince you, and something that is just an inquiry. So that was where the film started. What do kids think about gender? And what do kids from different types of familial makeups, different regions, urban versus rural, coastal, what are they thinking about gender? And that was how the film was sort of structured. So I did those 12 interviews with kids, which you can imagine what that was like, interviewing 6-year-olds, putting a mic on them. They literally would be like leaping off of a bunk bed, mid-air answering a question. And I had like 15 minutes. I mean, I often get the question when I do these Q&As, what did you have that you loved that hit the cutting room floor? Nothing. To get like even 15 good minutes out of these kids that was usable was a challenge because they were just so young and so active. They weren't just going to sit there like an adult would for a sit-down interview. So that was just really fun and fresh, and that humor, I think, shows up in the film. Put together an audio string out, so an audio version of the film, and then I worked with an animator to combine, some of those drawings that we were doing with some of the archival. I thought that it'd be really cool to bring in, I had always wanted to bring in archival media clips from, 1950s America and literally cut them up and reconstruct them. And that's what we did, to just kind of touch on what the zeitgeist of America has been for so long around gender, and then create this kind of new landscape. Next slide, please. So the impact work, in many ways, this is actually the most exciting thing for me to share about, which is, I think every filmmaker makes a film because they want people to see it. With this one, I had a really, really set goal, which was really wanting to, ironically, my goal for the film was to sort of educate grown-ups about, especially grown-ups who were not used to non-traditional gender identities, educate them around, what pronouns they, them, theirs mean, and what different types of gender identities there are, and how gender identity is different from sexual orientation. Then the film came out, and I realized I had sort of inadvertently made a kids movie. I really didn't realize I was making a movie for kids. So the film has had a very interesting life. We've done a lot of work with different agencies and organizations like the ones that you all work at. Grown-ups really like to watch the film and use it as a tool for conversation. Number one, it's short, and we're all so busy these days, even 10 minutes is hard, but this is short enough you can watch it on your lunch break. And it's light, as I said earlier, it's not just so heavy and so laden, it's funny. And the kids say, some of the things they say aren't totally accurate, that's okay. We can kind of relate to that and connect to that because we're going along that sort of learning journey and process with them around gender identity. We're seeing the world of new gender identities through a kid's eyes, and that allows us in some ways to bring that sort of freshness to whatever conversation we're having around gender identity following the film. So that has been really, really fun, and in some ways, to be in this world of kids, youth, and children, it's nonpartisan. It doesn't matter where you are in the political aisle. We all love and respect and cherish kids. And hopefully, we all appreciate their inherent wisdom and compassion. So that too has been fun, to make a film that can cut across partisan politics in some ways. So yeah, we've done festival and screenings, festivals all over, which has been really, really fun. All the major festivals have these pockets that are for kids now, and that's the best group to watch it with. They talk back to the screen. They don't think of it as one way. Someone will say something like, there's no boy colors and girl colors, and the kids will be like, yeah, because I like pink and I'm a boy. They're just shouting at the screen. It's so interactive and fun and kind of alarming, because you can only hear like half the dialogue when you do screenings to kids. We've created, when we first released the film, a lot of organizational partnerships with all of the major national LGBTQ plus IA organizations, especially ones working with youth. We just felt that it was really important to work with them in creating our materials. We have discussion guides, classroom guides, educational components that we use as we've gotten the film out into the world. And that has been a really valuable and interesting process, and one that we're continuing. Conferences, obviously conferences just like this, very much trying to get the film out there, make the film be what it really should be, which is a useful tool, not just something fun to watch, and then kind of move on, but something that really does open up and engage people in conversation. Corporations, we've had a really interesting life for the film, working with corporate ERGs, these employee resource groups that have sort of popped up in the past few years as corporations have realized how important it is to give people of different identities kind of communities within their companies that they can connect to. So that has been a really fun part of the process. And classrooms, we're just now beginning a major classroom push for the film. So hopefully, as we're entering this new year, we'll be able to get the film into classrooms, which is where I think it really, really wants to be. It's sort of its final resting place. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, and then future. So we are talking now with a major streamer. I can't say which one because it's not finalized, but about the film being online. I hope it will be, so everybody can see it and talk about it, not just in classrooms or organizations, but at home. I mean, how cool would it be if your kid was sitting there, scrolling around on their iPad and came back to you 10 minutes later and said, "You'll never believe what I just watched. Are you a boy or a girl or something else?" It's sort of my dream. And then, very much wanting to continue doing screenings and events, discussions with various agencies, continuing to formulate partnerships. Just trying to very much continue to use the film as a tool. Okay, so I want to stop talking so we can talk a little bit more and I can hear about what you all are thinking and wanting to ask. I want to encourage everyone to connect with us. Here are socials. And, we do a great job of keeping people sort of abreast of what we're doing. You can reach out. And then the next slide, please. Okay, final slide. So we created for you guys a customized website, this mamahasamustache.com/EDGY. And on this page is all of our resources. I think our discussion guide is up there, socials, contact info, and then also a free streaming link to the film for a week. So if you want to show it to your families, people that you work with, your kids, anyone, your friends, you can do that here for a week, okay? And then this QR code, I think, will take you direct to the page. And then I encourage people to, add us to your mailing list, or add yourselves to our mailing list, connect with those socials so we continue to be in touch. I'll also be here all day long. We have a table out there. I have a very limited batch of Mama Has a Mustache DVDs. And I had some bumper stickers. Those went like hotcakes. But I do have some postcards, too, that have this URL, the one that I just mentioned. I think that's it. Just want to encourage people to reach out because, again, the whole reason that I made this film was to have it, make an impact. So, thank you so much. So does anyone have any questions, comments, things that you agreed with or disagreed with in the film? There are no right or wrong answers. In fact, I like to hear sometimes things that either were a surprise to people or... I know we have mics going around, we have runners. It takes people a minute. Nobody wants to be the first one. Yes, our brave volunteer.
Hi there. I'm just wondering, due to your interviews for this film, and it sounds like some of your lived experience, if you could talk a little bit more about unique challenges for gender nonconforming, non-binary, and trans kids, especially kids that are like before the age of teenagers, because I feel like the majority of the experiences that we read about and learn about are folks that are already in or going into puberty.
Yeah. Well, I do think, obviously it totally differs according to home environment, school environment, community, religious environment, background. Every single kid has a totally different experience. Not to mention, in some ways we as parents, we so much foist our own identities and values onto our kids, even when we try not to, it's there. So going back to what I said earlier, in some ways this conversation really truly does cut across partisan politics and other divides because it's so personalized. So it's very hard to generalize. However, I would say, and I talk about this a lot with kids when I screen this film, I think that kids feel that gender is something, even if they're open to the non-binary conversation, there's so much an idea that we need to sort of get somewhere and then sort of lock ourselves in, put ourselves into a little box. Because that's what everybody tells them to do, grown-ups tell them to do. And that's what we do as grown-ups. They follow us. What are your pronouns? Well, I'm this, instead of, I don't know what I am. Today I'm this, tomorrow I'm gonna be something else. So I've worked really hard in my outreach work to work with kids around realizing that gender is a moving target. It might change according to the week, the day, the hour, or the minute. And how many of you, there's our parents in here, I know, who've seen, your kid one day likes pink and everything's pink. Paint my walls pink. I want that pink bunny. Only put me in pink. And then 2 months later, they only like brown or black. At least this is my daughter. Now I have to repaint her walls. She doesn't like purple anymore. And, so I see in her, I see in myself, I feel different according to what I'm wearing, who I'm with, how I feel I'm supposed to be, many different times a day. So I do think generally that's one thing we can say, like setting aside what people's personal experiences are at home, that we feel we have to be these sort of fixed identities. Our culture does not allow for a lot of gray area, especially American culture, especially around this topic, I would say. So I do think that there's that, and when you feel that you have to be something that you're not, it limits our self-expression, on the most generalized level. Does that answer your question? One question. Yeah. So the question was, where are these kids in the movie getting their question around gender from what I could tell? I do think that, especially at a really young age, before kids have started school, before they're allowed to watch TV, it's from their parents. And to a certain extent, peers, if they're having play dates, to a certain extent, possibly daycare providers, things like that. But then their worlds begin to open. And for me, it was, for my daughter, the Pandora's box was being able to watch. And this was associated with the pandemic. It probably was for a lot of us. We were stuck at home. So, it was nice until my daughter was 5 to say, I'm not going to show her any media. But when it was me alone with her for 12 hours a day, I started showing her media pretty quick, Netflix was like on all the time. So, I think that the media is the biggest one, and school, secondarily. And as you all know, those of you, again, who are parents or deal with kids, I mean, there's nothing like peer pressure to change the way that you feel about yourself or a certain color or a certain type of clothes instantly. All it takes is one comment, you know, why are your hair that long if you're a boy? Or, you know, why are you wearing a rainbow? Boys don't wear rainbow shirts. And it's just like that. But I do think that generally we undervalue how influential media is, media representation, whether it's books, billboards, but primarily TV and movies. And personally, I mean, I went through my daughter's books when she was born, and I literally whited out all of the he's and replaced it with she, because there are so many books that default to he as the pronoun. And now we have a rule in the house where she's not allowed to watch movies that feature white boys, or that have, not feature, but lead, where they're in the lead, other than like Harry Potter. You know, she can watch films about girls and people of color, but white boys or shows where girls are gossiping about boys or being mean to each other, I mean, she'll just say, I had to shut it off because you wouldn't support it. I'm sure this is going to come back later to haunt me, but you know, the point is, I do think it's really important to talk with our kids about media representation, what, you know, they're watching, especially around gender. And there are some shows now, She-Ra is one of them, that has non-binary figures and people who have different types of bodies on there. I mean, we're seeing more and more. So I think if we just make the littlest effort as parents, it doesn't even take a lot, just keep an eye on what your kids are watching. We can provide them with stuff that will have them feel like they're at the center of their own. They're watching stories about people who look like them, you know, gender-wise, maybe have gender representations like they do. And that's what's going to have them feel confident about themselves, is seeing themselves in the people who are playing those leads, so they don't feel that they're ancillary characters in their lives based on what they're seeing on screen.
Sally, I have a question for you over here, please. Hi. Do
Hi.
you think that kids, they have less years of conditioning around gender, that they have a better understanding? And does the simplicity of this from the kids' approach help adults with gender understanding?
Yes, yes, and yes. I do think that, you know, and part of what you see in the film is these kids who are so young, they're sort of, the word that I use is uncontaminated by ideas around gender. The whole world of it for them is this world of play. And especially given that most of the kids were 5 and 6 when the film was made and the pandemic was just hitting, so most of them actually hadn't been to school, other than these very sheltered sort of preschools. You know, I do think in many ways, I mean, that little boy who talks about wearing a tutu and his uncle wears a tutu too, I mean, it's completely, that is said like with a completely unladen way. So yeah, I think that they are like, what's that word? I don't know the word I'm looking for. They're definitely like newly driven snow around gender, where there's just no marks there. And I know there are really interesting conversations around gender identity and is it biological or sociological. Any of us who've ever been to a playground have seen boys running wild like hellions, girls doing it too, and then probably non-binary kids doing it too. But I do think that, you know, they bring, when I talk about the inherent wisdom and compassion of kids, what I mean is that inherently they don't see boxes necessarily when they're really young, you know, and they can just be who they are minute to minute, which ultimately is what we all want to be. So I think, I mean, ironically, you know, we go through our lives thinking that we need to educate kids and protect the young mind, and especially if you follow the political conversation around all of the controversial legislation nationally around gender identity being taught in the classroom. I mean, we have so much to learn from kids, you know, rather than this idea of it being totally the other way around, that we have to teach them everything. I think that they have to teach us a lot. So. Yeah. I ate too much too.
Yes, hikes galore. Thank you so much. One of the questions, forgive the deficit base of this, I was curious as to the barriers you encountered when you were seeking children to participate. What might have been the demographics, the reasons, the concerns for parents to say, no, I don't want to be a part of this?
Well, people, I mean, interestingly, because this big wave of controversy that arose this spring hadn't happened yet, actually, in many ways, I would say getting access to these families was fairly easy. Half the kids were friends and family of, my own and my daughters. I'd seen half of them grow up from the time they were babies, so that level of trust was already there. They had followed my career as a filmmaker, knew the nature of the work that I did, but definitely I realized like this very small section is way too sort of myopic and needs to be diversified in so many ways, so I made a real effort to do that. Honestly, parents were fairly willing to sign their kids up, and I do think that in some way it's because there hadn't been this controversy. Some of them were familiar with my work or had seen it online. I think they saw the value of the project. They thought that it would be fun. They didn't think the film would be a big deal or that it would be on a national streamer, although of course I've had meetings with all of them since then. And honestly, it was the beginning of the pandemic. I think people were just bored and wanted something to do and thought that it would be really valuable. All that they had to do was be part of a 15-minute conversation, 20-minute interview. They were like, sure, you can ask my kids some questions. I mean, I would say if people are interested in sort of the process of interviewing and filmmaking, usually you would give your subjects some preliminary questions. I'd love to talk to you about gender identity and just see what you think, something like that. With the parents, I wrote out like 20 different questions in 3 different clumps, sent them the questions and said, just so you know, these are the questions I'd like to ask. Let me know if there are any that you don't want on there. You can totally be there, and I'm not going to give your child any answers. So for instance, how babies are made, it's not my place to give that information. I may ask, but I'm not then delivering back any answers, and same thing around gender identities. It was all questions. So I think that made the parents feel comfortable because they knew, they had my word and they were going to be there to help monitor the conversation, that it was just going to be an inquiry. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such a pleasure, and I hope you have a great conference, and come chat with me. I'll be here all day. Thank you, and thank you, Cameron, and everyone else.